Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at herbworks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. HerbWorks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another HerbWorks podcast. I'm Laura Shakti.
And Roger Drummer.
Hello. What are we talking about today?
The title is, Oh No, Old Timers and Alzheimer's.
Okay. Old timers and Alzheimer's. Well, I already have a lot of questions about that. What are you talking about? Old timers.
Well, old timers is a term that used to be used all the time, let's say 30, 40 years ago, when you had a relative that was older that couldn't remember where their car keys were or something, you'd laugh and make a joke about having old timers. It was just something that happened to old people.
So they had old timers disease, or you just said, they have old timers?
Right? It was just this little fun calculation. Everybody had a relative that had old timers. Just didn't have as good a memory.
Everybody had a relative that had old timers.
But now, because Alzheimer's has almost become epidemic and it costs so much money and treatment into the healthcare system, that people don't use the term so much anymore because it's become such a dreaded disease.
Alzheimer's, you mean?
Alzheimer's, yes.
So you mean people don't use the term old timers anymore?
Not so much.
All right. So what's the reason we should know and care about Alzheimer's?
Because it's fast affecting such a vast number of people in this country and all over the world. It's become such a problem. You know, back when I was in my 20s, you never heard of it. You know, once in a while you heard of old timers, but you never heard of Alzheimer's. You never heard of people being committed for it. Nowadays, they say something like 10 to 12% of the population over 62, people that are retiring, have the beginning stages of Alzheimer's.
Wow, you're talking about your generation.
Yeah, and so it's becoming so commonplace. It's almost becoming what cancer used to be. You know, everybody has somebody in their family that has cancer. Well, now everybody has somebody in their family with Alzheimer's and the severe type. And it's costing so much money that people don't know how to take care of their relatives at home. They end up being institutionalized. And there's really nothing for them, at least up until now.
Well, why is this special to you, or why is this something that you have researched, that you have interest in?
Well, I have an herb company, and I make a product called Tianqi, which everybody knows is a stress and brain essentials product, is what I call it. And one of the reasons I make that is because the first reason was when I was practicing herbalist in the Los Angeles area, I realized stress was really the underlying issue with everyone. And I wanted to do something about that. And I wanted to reach the maximum number of people with it. And when I was working on that and studying all the effects of stress, one of the things I noticed was right at that time, memory issues started to become in the news a lot, right? A lot of awareness around Alzheimer's just started out, right? And
this is back in the 90s, or?
This would be back in the, just around the year 2000, 2002, when I was first formulating my first version of this drink. And all my studies on stress led me to the fact that one of the main things that happens to you is that it destroys your memory centers in your brain. Because too much cortisol, which is the stress hormone, actually causes the hippocampus area of your brain, which is the memory center, to soak up toxins at a much higher rate and to stay inflamed. And that destroys your memory over a period of time. So you can do great things for your memory just by not being so stressed out and lowering stress hormones. So that's how I kind of got into it. And then I realized, because of all the research I was doing and all the people that I had worked with, that, you know, the type of herbalism I practice,
which is adaptogenic Chinese herbology?
Well, it's called the three treasure system. And in that system, adaptogenic herbs are used. They're tonic herbs. But that system promotes the idea that most people's health issues are due to what they call a Shen imbalance, or an imbalance of spirit, which basically translates as stress, and a loss of energy. And in Chinese terms, loss of energy meant hormones of the reproductive system.
We would say you're deficient in it.
Deficient of a vital energy. Well, that translates right over into nutrition, and a deficiency of nutrients is what's driving a lot of the health problems in this country. We tend to cover up our nutritional deficiencies by getting pharmaceutical drugs, which create more nutritional deficiencies and never take care of the core issue. And when you're studying stress and you're studying brain function, you realize a lot of these issues with your memory that start showing up in your 50s are due to a nutritional deficiency you didn't take care of in your 20s. And now your brain, literally, my theory I came up with, and I'm sticking to it, is that
that's your theory, and you're sticking to it.
A lot of memory issues are just related to starvation of the brain. Over a long period of time, the brain finally breaks down, can no longer make up for what you're missing, and things start happening. You know, most people are, when they're in their 20s, 30s, they're driven by hormones. Their hormone levels are pretty high. They're pretty strong. They force themselves or push themselves through things. They could have a nutritional deficiency that causes them a slight health problem, and they ignore it thinking, well, that's just them. They think a certain way because of this, or they act a certain way because of this, not knowing it could just be because they're missing a nutrient. You know, back in the 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have the amount of studies that we now have on nutrition. But still, the medical community does not look at nutrition as a viable resource as far as correcting things. So you have these two worlds that just kind of battle each other, or don't pay attention to each other, right? And so these things are showing up now more because foods are depleted to begin with. They don't have as much nutrition as they did 50 years ago. But also, it's a lie that most people are eating better. There's a small segment of the population that eats well, but most people are just addicted to fast food. We now have a generation of people growing up whose parents became addicted to fast food, and they were raised on it. And so they've had nutritional deficiencies since the day they're born. Most people are omega-3 deficient their entire life. You know, so you have to make up for these things. You have to be aware. You know, your brain, 30% of your brain is made up of some of the fats that are in omega-3 fats. So if you're not getting it, then your brain is like having a car with half as much oil in it. It runs really good for a while, and then it just wears out. America is overfed and undernourished. Right. And that's totally true. That people, I mean, there was a study just came out, was really quite comical. You sent it to me, that you found in the news that showed that.
Which one?
Upper middle class people.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Think that they eat well, but they actually don't.
I think that was the New York Times.
When they looked into their diet and stuff, they realized they didn't know any more about food than other people. They were just eating fast food all the time, and might have 3 meals at home a week that are good food and things like
interesting.
that. But you combine that with the fact that we have so many more toxins in our environment now, and it just keeps growing and growing. Now we have the introduction of genetically modified food, which, whether you like GMOs or not, they do require an extra load of pesticides sprayed on everything, and those have been shown to be cause cancer and other different diseases. And so we have this toxic overload, and that plays a role in memory loss, and it plays a role in Alzheimer's. But the reality is that very few people eat well. Very few people have much knowledge about nutrition at all. And I always am fascinated by this, because there's nothing in your life you do more often than eat. So why wouldn't you learn something about it? And there's nothing in your body that actually functions without nutrition. Your level of nutrition affects the health of every cell in your body. So why don't we pay more attention to it? And part of that reason is that we're just programmed I was reading in this book the other day that the guy termed it, we're domesticated. Right?
Domesticated to what?
It made me think of cows, domesticated animals. We're taught to be a certain way, and a lot of that has to do with TV, and we learn about our food choices through TV, through programming. We have the food pyramid in this country, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. We have the fact that, this is an interesting fact. Congress decided that they issued a warning that the food supply was in trouble because they now know that the topsoil was so deficient in nutrients that they couldn't guarantee that people were actually getting the amount of nutrition they needed out of their food. And this was in 1932, they said this.
Wow.
Right. So fast forward to what is that now? 80 some years?
Yeah.
You think it's changed? No. We've learned how to dump stuff on the soil to make crops look really good. That doesn't mean there's a whole lot of stuff in them that are beneficial. So you have to be aware of your food, and that in every phase, whether it's been sprayed a lot, the quality of it, how many chemicals are used in it, all those things. And it all plays a role in all these things I want to cover now about Alzheimer's.
All right. So let's talk about Alzheimer's. You have a book, I see, with us that I know you've been studying quite a bit. Tell me about it.
Well, it's called The End of Alzheimer's by Dale Bredesen, and I think it's probably the best book I have ever read on Alzheimer's and understanding it and basically how to treat it. And it's not being picked up a lot by the medical society because it's complicated. Medicine is based on one thing. They got hooked on that whole idea of antibiotics. One chemical kills one germ, and they're addicted to that. And so they can't move into this thing, which he is talking about, is identifying what exactly is going on and how to actually make an individual program for someone to get them back on track and to help their memory. The great thing about this book is that the author broke down Alzheimer's into 3 distinct groups or different types. And then he had an underlying theory that he's proven as to why the brain actually goes into these types of things. So it's very fascinating. Again, it's probably complicated for most people to do. In fact, you wouldn't do it on your own. You would contact the author's organization. They set you up on a program through medical testing and things. But the 3 types that he breaks it down into are, number 1 is the inflammatory type. Number 2 is kind of a suboptimal nutrition type. And number 3 is a toxic type. Now, all 3 of these can be happening at one time, and generally they are. But what he's basically pointing out is that in different groups, one of them is the prevalent mode by which you ended up with Alzheimer's, and then the other 2 are kind of things that come along and maybe make it worse. And so if you look at the first one, which is based on inflammation, that just means that you're more than likely born with the gene, which is called APOE4, that actually puts you in a higher risk for getting Alzheimer's.
Okay.
Now, don't freak out about that because there's a small amount of people that actually have Alzheimer's that are there because they have that gene. And so that first class, which has that prevalent gene, is driven by inflammation. So inflammatory processes in your body have to be taken care of so you're not driving that type of Alzheimer's. Okay. Now, in that type of Alzheimer's, you turn on genes that shut off a gene called SIRTI, which is SIRT, which is a gene that is considered to be a longevity gene, right? This is the gene they talk about when they're talking about the herb resveratrol.
Oh, okay.
Resveratrol is a nutrient that's been in the news a lot because
you can get it from wine. That's why it's been in the news
but
a
there's
lot.
very little in wine. I have more resveratrol in one packet of Tianchi than you can get out of 100 gallons of wine, right?
Wow.
And so basically what that has been in the news about is that there's a cap on the end of your chromosomes. And that cap, they can measure it now, And that cap has tells you whether or not you're aging rapidly or slowly, or even if you're moving toward a longevity state.
Are you talking about telomeres?
Telomeres, yes.
Oh, okay.
That telomere is a way of seeing how much damage you have cellular, right? So basically, the APOE4 gene and inflammation shuts that off. So you don't have the advantage of having that one gene that helps you with longevity, right? And then it actually turns on another inflammatory chemical called NF-κB. And that's an inflammatory driver for all inflammation in your body. Now, I know that one really well because that's the same driver that drives the production of cancer cells. So when I was part of my cancer program was taking herbs that damp down that inflammation marker. So by getting rid of the inflammatory marker, it's kind of like taking the gasoline away from a fire.
You give it less fuel to burn.
Runs out of fuel after a while, or it doesn't burn so hot. So that's the first type, right? So your body has less of a optimal reaction to inflammatory things. So if you're eating a lot of trans fats and you don't have enough nutrition and you're exposed to a lot of toxins, that drives your inflammation. And this is kind of where you start to see how all these things are related. So even though this type is more related to inflammation, not having enough nutrition, which is the second type, helps drive that, because one of the roles of nutrition is its ability to protect you from inflammation, the cellular damage that happens from inflammation. Also, toxins cause inflammation. So the more you're exposed to, the more you drive this type of inflammatory Alzheimer's, and the less defense system you have for it, right? So it's all interrelated. So you have this your body's primed to just have rampant inflammation, which is destroying your brain. So you throw stress in there, and now your brain is soaking up more of it, right? So the other interesting thing about all these types, which I'm going to describe, is that they have recognized that there's a certain type of receptor or molecule on all your neurons called APP. And if you have too much inflammation and not enough nutrition, that receptor doesn't work properly. It doesn't get what it actually needs. And so it makes a decision. And that decision is to downsize your brain. It produces more of these chemicals we associate with Alzheimer's, like tau and amyloid beta. It produces more of it so it can clear out more of your brain, because the signal you're giving it through your inflammation and nutrition is that that's what you want to do. So it's a natural process that your brain is going through because of the signals you're actually giving it. It is a perfect storm.
Yeah.
It's not one thing. It's everything coming together at once. Your exposure to things, the type of food you eat, your level of nutrition, the amount of toxins that you don't clear out of your system, and it's all interrelated. None of it happens by itself. In fact, part of this first type, which is inflammation, they know that you have an impaired mitochondrial function, right? Now, in case you're not familiar with mitochondria, that's like a little furnace in your cell that produces energy, or ATP, right? So you have anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 of them in every cell of your body, right? So you have impaired mitochondrial function. You're not making energy in that cell. That also relates to how cancer develops, right? A damaged cell has damaged mitochondrial function. So in this, there's things that actually cause your mitochondria to become weak. And they're probably things every single person in the country is doing, right?
Like what?
Like antibiotics, statin drugs for heart disease, alcohol, any of the things that are listed in NSAIDs, the over-the-counter anti-inflammatories like aspirin, ibuprofen, drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, antifungal drugs, a whole host of pharmaceutical drugs. So now think about that. Who in this country, in the age of 60, besides maybe cocaine and methamphetamine, aren't doing all these things or haven't done these things on a regular basis without knowing it. They're just part of life. You get a headache, you're working, you're out farming, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're popping some of this.
You have to take painkillers or maybe an antibiotic for an infection.
You don't think you're doing anything wrong. It's just stuff you get over the counter. You're living your life. You're just a normal guy, right? And so all these things disrupt mitochondrial function, which adds to the inflammation of this. And one of the things they're finding out is that all pharmaceutical drugs disrupt mitochondrial function and nutritional status. And so this is my main beef with that, is that there's a lot of nutritional problems that we take care of with pharmaceutical drugs because we haven't either educated ourselves or went to a doctor who believes in nutrition, and we just get handed a pill instead of correcting our diet and seeing if that makes a difference. You're never going to tell people they can't have a beer after work or they can't pop a couple aspirin or ibuprofen if they get a headache. But if you're doing that 5 times a week for that headache, or you're on that antibiotic 6 times a year, you're doing these, then you have a major issue going on that you haven't corrected.
Right.
And, there's a big difference between using something once in a while and depending on it to get through your life. And so all these things create a storm. Just look at statin drugs for cholesterol. They finally, after they've been on the market 30 years, issued a warning with them that they disrupt memory. So, that should have been on when they came out with them, but that wouldn't have been a good business decision. But they now know that there's a huge segment of the population, is 50 million people, I'm going to guess, that are taking statins every day. They disrupt mitochondrial function. They disrupt memory, right? They lower the amount of cholesterol in your brain, which cholesterol is a medium by which neurotransmitters send signals across. So you're kind of messing up the field where everybody's playing, right? So you imagine playing football and you couldn't throw a forward pass because it only goes 2 feet and it hits something and falls, right? that's kind of what's happening when you're doing that.
Your sports analogies. Oh,
just the thing just won't go through the air, right? So that's kind of what's happening, right? So if you're going to do that, then you have to know that there's something to balance that out and to correct that. If you absolutely need that one thing, then learn what the thing is you need to take to balance that out, and then maybe you can have the best of both worlds. Or better yet, learn how to control your cholesterol by changing your diet, because there's a lot of things you can do. So there's all these things that if you just really delve into it a bit, you can start to correct on your own. And again, I'm not against pharmaceutical drugs. They save millions of lives, right? But it's the dependence on them that causes the problems. It's, like there was a study I was looking at the other day that showed the growing of new neurons in your brain doesn't end no matter how old you are. They've done autopsies on people in their late 70s and found out they were growing new neurons in their hippocampus area of their brain. Here's the interesting thing, though, is that they only let healthy people in the study because the guy who did the study, and the person was from Columbia University, right? Ivy League school. So the person that did the study said that we didn't let anybody in it who was depressed or on antidepressants because we all know that stops the growth of new neurons in your brain.
Interesting.
So now think about, 15% of the population's on antidepressants?
I think it's more than that now, actually.
It's probably higher than that, and it stops the growth of new neurons in your hippocampus area of your brain. And I'm telling you, a lot of people end up on antidepressants because of stress. They don't go and ever have their brain actually tested. They go and just complain about not being able to handle things. They're stressed out, and they're given a pill by a general practitioner, right? And there's another article was published in the Wall Street Journal that showed that people on antidepressants have trouble getting off of them. In fact, they find it impossible to get off. Now, why is that? It's because they alter your brain chemistry. You can take one type of antidepressant. Most of them will cause you to grow more receptors for a certain neurotransmitter. Let's say whether it's for serotonin or for its dopamine. And if you go off, your brain is really craving something because now it has more receptors that are not being taken care of because you've had a lack to begin with.
So you're creating a need for it.
So you're creating a need for it, and you have to balance that out. Go see a functional medicine practitioner, or an herbalist, or a nutritionist that can teach you how to use amino acids and different things to do that, that slow getting off of those drugs, if that's what you want to do. But they never mentioned it in the article. Right?
So in relation to Alzheimer's, taking drugs over a long period of time can have lasting damaging effects on the function of the brain.
Right, and they can also have create their own type of toxicity. And then you have to think about the fact that most people long-term on certain drugs like that never address their nutritional needs because they just run off and get a drug. So they are compounding their problem down the road because they're still ignoring the fact that they needed some sort of nutrition. I mean, I've talked to countless people that have gotten off all kinds of medication by changing their diet, right? And there's another study that was just put out in the paper talking about how certain types of food help people get rid of their depression. It turns out there's been studies for a decade on this, that just switching people from a standard American diet to a diet with whole foods. And they weren't real specific. They just said some fish a couple times a week, some lean red meat, lots of vegetables and fruit, and some whole grains. And a lot of people found that they were no longer depressed. And they said it worked with every age group, kids, teenagers, elderly people. The better they ate, the less depressed they were, and the less they tended to think they needed drugs, and a lot of people were actually able to get off of them. And what does that tell you? That your brain function, every part of your brain function, your mood, just the way you process information is based on nutrition. And if you're not giving it what it needs, it's just not going to run right. And so that plays a role. Basically, what we're talking about now is type 2 Alzheimer's, which is related more to just the fact that your body is not meeting its nutritional needs, and so your hormones are off. You have high levels of certain type of inflammation that are related just to nutrition, and you probably have blood sugar issues, all related to nutrition. Now, if you have that set of Alzheimer's, type 2, which is, again, related to suboptimal nutrients and hormones, then you're going to have more inflammation just like type 1, and it's going to make the damage from all these things you're missing worse because, again, what do your hormones and nutrition do for you? Part of their function is to protect you and protect your cell from damage through the inflammatory process, right? Vitamin D is famous for that. Low vitamin D is one of the worst things you can do for your memory long term. Because again, all these things, suboptimal nutrition, influences that APP molecule, and that's the molecule that determines whether it's going to give you a signal the neurons in your brain to just disappear because you don't need them, right? Or to make new ones and grow more. So you want to give it the right signal, right? You want to just signal it to grow more. And just like that one study, you're not getting that signal if you're on antidepressants. So you should kind of look at maybe if you're doing that, then you want to enhance all the nutritional stuff that'll offset maybe that effect. Everything's a balance of what you're actually doing. Maybe you don't need to be on it, you can correct it, or maybe you need to figure out exactly how to enhance all these things so you can do both.
So for someone that's simply generally concerned about aging well, right, and avoiding any possible brain inflammation, what can people do on a regular basis that will help with this?
Well, it all comes back to food and nutrition. Food and nutrition.
And right? What do you use in Tianqi? Are there any nutraceuticals or specific herbs that I'm taking when I take my Tianqi that will help me with this?
Well, look, here's an example. I made Tianqi because, again, it's a stress and brain essentials, right? My big issue and what I realized 10 years ago when I made it was that a lot of memory issues, which were becoming prevalent, had to do with a lack of nutrition, starvation of the brain. Now, when you look at type 2 Alzheimer's, you have one of the things that drives it is called high homocysteine levels. And what is homocysteine levels? It's a high inflammatory marker based on the fact that you don't have the right nutrition in your body to break down methionine, which is an amino acid in protein foods, right? Oftentimes, it's because you're eating too much protein and don't have enough B vitamins. And what are the B vitamins that actually cause you to lower that and normal it out? Folic acid and B12.
Am I getting that in Tianqi?
It's in Tianqi.
Excellent. Now I don't have to worry so much.
And it's in the methylated form that you would actually take if you wanted to treat high homocysteine levels. So as a preventative, those two basic nutrients actually not only influence homocysteine levels, but they're used in the development and protection of every nerve in your entire body, including your brain. In fact, they claim that being deficient in methylfolate over a lifetime can cause atrophy in 7 different areas of your brain. So think about that.
Is one of them the part that brings your wife flowers?
Mine's not deficient.
Thank goodness for that.
So see how that all ties in to where just basic, it's not super things you're missing, it's basic stuff that you have to be aware of and just get in your system. People don't realize this. The main disruption you have in your system to lack of sleep is the inflammation it causes, and a lot of that is due because you have a stress response. Your body has a stress response. You wake up in a stress response when you have interrupted sleep. And then usually you feel real bad because you haven't slept. You stumble out to the kitchen and have something sweet, something with sugar in it to pick your energy up. Well, you've already had a stress response, so you're not clearing blood sugar out, and now you've added more sugar to your system. So now you've increased the amount of inflammation coursing through your body due to the fact that you didn't sleep well and you had a stress response.
But then, so how does Tianqi address that? Why is it that when I take Tianqi versus if I have, a cup of very strong tea, or very rarely ever for me if I'm traveling or something and I have coffee, which I'm not a coffee drinker, like my brain may wake up, I may feel more awake with caffeine versus when I take something that has the nutraceuticals and the herbs in it, I just feel awake in a very different way. My whole feeling of what I can accomplish and what I understand is very different.
That's because the adaptogenic herbs are changing the way your body has reacted to a stressor, and it allows you to have the stress, shut it off, and start flooding your system with the hormones it needs to bring it back into equilibrium. And that's the thing that's missing if you don't do that, if you just add sugar to your system. And then there's nutraceuticals in it that just are needed every day for clear thought, for mental clarity. It stabilizes your brain, brings about a state of brain coherence. And that's the difference in it. Right? And so starting your day with that just kind of sets you up with having good brain energy, and you're able to handle stress better, and then you make better choices on everything. So now the type 3, I want to mention type 3 Alzheimer's before we wrap this up. And it's important because the type 3 is based on toxic exposure. We've kind of covered that already because toxic exposure makes type 1, the inflammatory type, worse. It makes the type 2, which is suboptimal nutrition and hormones, worse because both of those are disrupted by inflammation, and the toxins cause more inflammation. So if you have suboptimal nutrition and are exposed to toxins, then there's nothing running the protective mechanisms in your body to protect your DNA from damage. So everything is going to be damaged at a much higher rate. So this type needs to take things that help them to detoxify, along with building up their nutritional status, along with helping to change, turn on the SIR-T molecule so it has a longevity, protective, anti-inflammatory effect to drive down the inflammation in the body. All these different things, but the toxins really drive that. And I was reading a study yesterday that just fascinated me on this. It was done in Mexico City by a group of researchers out of the University of Montana. And they did autopsies on 203 people that had accidentally died, or maybe they had, some illness, quick illness that caused them to die. And they were testing them for the effects of pollution. Now, we all know Mexico City's heavily polluted. They say it's living there one day, walking around is like smoking 3 packs of cigarettes.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
There's so much smoke, and a lot of it's from just cooking fires. A lot of poor people in Mexico City. So there's a lot of soot from that, fine particles, a lot of cars. It's just a combination of all this pollution, right? So what they found, they were testing for markers of Alzheimer's, and they found the 2 inflammatory markers that everybody is tested for when they do autopsies to see if you have Alzheimer's, which is the tau protein and the amyloid beta. Mm-hmm. They found it in an 11-month-old baby.
No.
Both of them.
Why would those markers be an 11-month-old baby?
11-month-old baby, because they were exposed to such high levels of toxins.
From the air.
And and probably combined with nutritional deficiency. Right? They might not overeat as much as people in our country, but they still probably have poor nutrition because of their income level. So you look at that, and what they showed was that even the rate of teenage suicide was much higher because of the fact of the pollution, because of the amount of inflammation in the brain, and probably the lack of nutrition. So all these things kind of come together to where, it's kind of proven out these 3 types of Alzheimer's. You have an 11-month-old baby showing the 2 markers for Alzheimer's. What is that related to? It has to be nutrition. It has to be toxins in the environment. So you see all these different studies coming out, which people aren't putting together. The fact that, exposure to certain pharmaceutical drugs may stop the development of neurons in your brain. You have the fact that pollution is showing up in babies and showing that they have Alzheimer's. You have studies showing now that if you just switch your diet to a diet of whole foods, you can help with depression. All these different studies coming out, really, what do they all point to? The fact that things like Alzheimer's, which is a really severe disease, may just be related to our lifestyle and to the food that we eat and the amount of nutrition that we take into our bodies, and just the fact we don't pay attention to all these different things that are now, kind of creating the perfect storm that's disrupting our brain function.
It's a really big problem.
People that have experienced brain injury, concussion, or any type, whether it's sports or just concussion, in everyday life, auto accidents, all these different things heighten requirements and make everything else worse. So it's never one thing that's happening that causes this. But the best thing you can do, again, is, figure out what you need as a supplement, deal with your stress, eat well, eat organic food. There's no reason to buy food that has extra chemicals in it. There's chemicals you can't get away from. So, drink clean water. You don't want to be drinking fluoride. It's a neurotoxin. All these different things there's no other description of it other than it's the perfect storm for creating memory issues.
So we both have personal interests in battling Alzheimer's. I have, my father died last year, and he had been exposed to Agent Orange as a Vietnam veteran and developed many health issues, including dementia. You yourself have had many head injuries that have led to very intense concussions, memory loss, brain inflammation. So were you thinking about those kind of things for yourself when you started developing your herbal products such as Tianqi?
Well, I never thought of it when I started developing it, but I sure thought of it after I dug into all the research. Because basically I'm the typical person that is in real danger of getting Alzheimer's.
Yeah, you are.
The reality is that I'm on the high risk for Alzheimer's and CTE because of concussion injury. So, all these things really, they're both hobbies of mine, studying memory and brain injury and football. And I'm someone that, like you said, has had severe brain injury. And at one time I couldn't put sentences together for 3 weeks.
That is so intense.
So I've had all these experiences, and yet I feel fully. I'm pretty good. And so, for my age, I'm in my 60s and I'm actually able to do a podcast. And so, but I honestly believe it's because I pay attention to all this. I'm fascinated by it. I eat really well. I take nutrients. I pay attention to specific needs of my brain. And I really don't worry about it. You mentioned Parkinson's. Now, there's a high correlation now with Parkinson's and people that do gardening and farming and other industries that are related to being exposed to certain pesticides.
Interesting.
Because it tends to destroy the area of the brain that's related to Parkinson's. I want to wrap it up here and say that even though it sounds bleak, that we're all going to get Alzheimer's, the reality is that it's no time better than right now to start paying attention to your memory and start paying attention to your food and your habits and your stress and taking a few things that just enhance brain function, because it's much easier to protect something than to get it back once it's really starting to go downhill. I also want to say, though, if you have a family member who's just beginning to have the effects of Alzheimer's and maybe got diagnosed, I would be contacting Dr. Dale Bredesen. You can find him on the internet, or you can buy his book, The End of Alzheimer's, and they have a program where they can actually put you on the entire program to stabilize your memory, and it's the best thing available in this country, I swear, on any memory-related issue. If you're going down that path and you want to stabilize it and not get worse, this is probably the best thing that you can do. And he's training doctors all over America, so you might be able to get on his website and find out somebody in your area that you can work with. It's going to be a process. You have to do medical tests that might not be covered by your insurance, and you might have to, buy a bunch of supplements. But there's nothing better in my opinion, to help heal your brain than the program that he's put together.
Right. Full disclosure here, you have no relationship with this person whatsoever.
Oh,
right?
Not at all. Not at all. But it is an incredible book, an incredible life's work. It's called The End of Alzheimer's, Dale Bredesen.
Super. Well, this has been a great discussion about old-timers, Alzheimer's, and the oh no that we need to get over, and how to move forward with protecting ourselves and having a better life.
Yes, so thanks for tuning in to the HerbWorks podcast.
This is Laura Shakti.
And Roger Drummer. And if you like this, you can find more information at herbworks.com, or you can go to my YouTube channel. Please sign up. I have a YouTube channel, and you should go and sign up. I think it's youtube.com/herbworks.